This is from Vikrant's, I think, because of the wind, probably. I think he has muted, so now it's fine.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So Garima ma'am is also here. Yeah. So, I'll just first of all, good afternoon, everyone. Glad to have you all on the panel. So, we're really looking forward to this panel. And so, to begin with, firstly, welcoming everyone to this very important webinar we have planned on this social stock exchange, which I would say is the hot topic of this sector currently. So, we'll be basically demystifying this entire concept and try to analyze on different provisions and opportunities this new concept is bringing along. So I'll get into my role. So I'd like to welcome all the panelists one by one. First of all, we have Dr. Garima with us. Dr. Garima is a associate professor in Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, Government of India. So Dr. Garima is with IICA since March 2014, and she has also worked as assistant professor of law at National Law University Jodhpur for 5 years, and has also practiced as an associate advocate before the High Court of Judicia in Jaipur. She has around 11 years of industry and academic experience. She pursued a master's program in commercial and corporate laws from Queen's Mary University of London, and then did her doctoral research on corporate governance. At IICA, she has trained various directors from various public sector units and private companies for improving board effectiveness. She is a regular faculty for the programs on corporate governance for ministry officials and ICLS officers. She has undertaken various consultancy assignments and has recently completed the project, which is strategic document for Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Welcome, Dr. Garima. Next up, we have Mr. Hemant Gupta. So Mr. Hemant just now texted that he is in a meeting with on the BSc board. So he'll be joining us in a short while. I'll just like to introduce to all our participants who Hemant is. He is the managing director at BIL Ryerson Technology Startup Incubator Foundation. So basically, after 26 years at Citi, where he worked in a variety of functions in India and North America, Mr. Hemant decided to swap a large corporate role for a more socially impactful role with BSc Saman, a startup set up by BSc for helping companies do more effective CSR. He led the building of a platform for CSR matchmaking and management that was acquired by Ministry of Corporate Affairs in 2020 and relaunched as the National CSR Exchange in 2022. He was also a member of the working committee and technical group constituted by SEBI for setting up the social stock exchange in India. He is currently working on launching the SSC at BSc. So Hemant holds a management degree from IIM Calcutta and an engineering degree from IIT Madras. So that's about Mr. Hemant, and we'll be welcoming him once he joins. And next we have Mr. Vikas Gambhir, who is Executive Director from Grant Thornton Bharat. Mr. Vikas leads the social sector NGO advisory practice at Grant Thornton Bharat LLP. Vikas has over 2.5 decades of experience in the areas of capacity building, donor-based reviews, grant audits, and governance advisory to clients in finance, manufacturing, healthcare, and not-for-profit sectors. For the past decade, his focus has been on various themes like healthcare, education, environment, and consultancy, consulting India's leading not-for-profit clients, including international NFPs, corporate foundations, various institutional and multilateral agencies. He is a consultant to leading not-for-profit clients, institutional donors, and corporate foundations. He also sits on the board and heads committees as an advisor to several NGOs. Welcome, Vikas, sir. And now we have Professor Dr. Amita Singh, who is the president at NAP SIPAG, the Disaster Research Group, NDRG. And she was also the former professor at JNU at the Center for Study of Law and Governance. Currently, she is a member of International Network for Disaster Studies. Recently, in 2017-18, she was also a visiting professor at the American University at Washington, DC, and then at Harvard. She is a recipient of many international and national awards, including the 2014 Bangladesh National Award Nawab Bahadur Said Nawab Ali Chaudhary National Award in Dhaka. Her other awards in the past are Delhi's Public Service Award, NALSA Social Justice Award, Millennium Award for Women in Public Service, and E-Governance Award 2010. Professor Singh is an ardent campaigner for habitat rights of non-human species and leads an organization called Walk for Animals and Habitat. Welcome, Dr. Amit. So now we have the two core people who have been part of the SSC's core committee of Sphere India and who are the backbone for hosting this, organizing this entire webinar as well. First, Mr. Mihir R. Bhatt, who is the director of AIDMI, All India Disaster Mitigation Institute. He is leading the thinking and action on disaster risk reduction since 1995 in India and South Asia through AIDMI. And he has worked in 69 cities, 89 districts across 16 states and 8 countries of Asia. He's a senior fellow at FXB Center for Health and Human Rights, Harvard. He chairs Duryog Nivaran Network and is on the independent panel of Accountability Now, Gender and DRR Working Group of IAP UNI SDR, Transboundary Early Warning System Collaboration South Asia and International Humanitarian Studies Association. He is a senior fellow of the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative since 2007 and was a member of the panel that selects the humanitarian coordinator for the United Nations. Welcome here, sir. And now we have Justin Jebakumar, who is the Director of Government Relations for Habitat for Humanity India. Mr. Justin is a development professional with experience of more than 2 decades in planning, networking, partnership development, result-based management, monitoring, evaluation, and training. He holds 2 graduation degrees, one from Indian University in MSW and another from overseas, MHM from Leeds University, UK. Justin is working with Habitat since May 2011. He is also an integral part of Sphere's Shelter Sector Committee, where he is serving as a secretary of the committee with background in shelter and infrastructure. He has led various online and offline initiatives and campaigns for women, rural population, as well as emergency response at disaster-struck areas. Welcome, Justin, sir. Last but not the least, our CEO, Mr. Vikrant Mahajan, who will be the moderator for the day. Mr. Vikrant comes with 24 years of versatile professional experience, having worked across sectors with government, UN, NGOs, corporate, academia, and armed forces. He's a passionate humanitarian and have been on the front line of most disasters in India and the region over nearly 2 decades. He has also been very active on global and national policy forums and represents on several interagency forums and board of many organizations. He comes with a multidisciplinary background in engineering, public administration, organizational behavior, and law. He's a certified program management professional from PMI, Black Belt Sigma, master's trainer on CHS, Sphere, and other such standards. So this was a brief but elaborate introduction of all the speakers. So thank you so much for this opportunity. And with this, without wasting much time, I'd like to hand it over to Vikrant sir, who will be taking us through the session. Over to you, Vikrant sir.
Great, thank you so much, Sergio, for all your control coordination and also the great introduction for a great panel we have got it together. I think also thanks for doing all the background coordination for enabling this panel. In discussion, I think on a very important topic today, I would say that rather I would repeat the words of Professor Amita. I think she wrote back in one of the emails that this is the development of the decade for the social sector, to have a social sector exchange as notified by the government last month. And I think today's discussion, with the help of this eminent panel we have, is we try to demystify the nuances of this social sector exchange, what it is all about, who all can participate, and what's the opportunities are there in this social sector exchange. Also, we understand, in terms of what are some of the challenges and some of the risks associated with it, and where are some of the areas where we see the future development from own experience basis can happen from this important initiative. I think to straightway get into a discussion, to understand what is the social sector exchange, I will first, call upon Mr. Mihir R. Bhatt. Mihir bhai, if you help us understand, what this all initiative is all about, what's the relevance in our Indian context? We see some of the global case studies where such experience has already been there, but how relevant is it in India, and how it can contribute to India's development in future? So over to you, Mihir bhai. Looking forward to hear from you.
Oh, thank you very much, Vikrant bhai, and it's a pleasure to be part of this process. And this panel especially, and we have been skirting around at MI as AIDMI around social impact work and social enterprise work a lot. And because of that, social stock exchange is not very far, all three very closely being related. Sphere India itself has taken the lead, as we all see under Justin Kumar, that how the humanitarian agencies, which are part of civil society, social sector, can or should, will be included into the social stock exchange. We have an eminent panel, and each panel member brings in something very specific to demystify the social stock exchange idea, which is now turning into reality. We have Kambir Saab, and will be giving us a lot of nitty-gritty. We have Amit Bhai, and who's in the middle of all this entire process, and will tell us what is actually where the matter stands and what are possible doors, and if not doors, windows for the humanitarian sector to actually get in to the process if it is decided to do that. And of course, Garimaji, you will be telling us more about how both the corporate sector as well as CSR and other possible initiatives can be coordinated with this. With this background, and as we know that the concept aims at the social part of the social sector work for the humanitarian civil society organizations. And we are doing a false separation between development or social sector organizations and humanitarian. Actually, they are all part of the same group and would be covered by and large in one way or the other through the social stock exchange. I also don't want to forget the reality that this is happening when there is a tremendous compliance requirement that is increasing on the social sector at large, and civil society, humanitarian sector particularly. And this whole renewal of FCRA numbers and various rules and regulations that are coming up, because in that background that the social stock exchange is coming up. I thought to start with, I would, we also have an excellent note, background note that all the participants must have received, and if not, I would request Mr. Abraham to put it on the chat, and that is the Sphere India, the panel discussion note, which they have provided. It is very succinct and very well explained. So at least that is something we all must look at before we we plunge into the actual panel discussion. I have the following key points very briefly to make about the social stock exchange. And one is the point related to building clarity on the advantages and challenges which, while adapting SSE. And while we will hear more from Hamid Bhai, what I was wondering, and we should be discussing and debating, I'll be a bit provocative. The advantage is that the economic investments come based on social performance, and that's something which is not quite done before. So that is something which is which can be a challenge, which can be actually an opportunity. And the disadvantage is that many humanitarian aspects may not be investable, so to speak, or have any high or any economic return. So how do you measure social investment and social returns when there is no economic returns taking place? And that is something for the humanitarian sector, especially very important, because the need, there are no time to actually do a business plan or to show that this particular humanitarian investment is going to return, have good returns in the short term or long term. So that is one part about building clarity on the advantages. The second major aspect that we need to look at is the is that assessing the overall impact of social stock exchange will bring in developing strategies to face it. And there is a need for improving social sector performance a lot, and we all agree with that. But also there is the fear of over control, over regulation, and some things which cannot necessarily be done in this particular manner. The humanitarian action will be more commodified. There is a great fear because of social stock exchange, and will be more oriented towards social investments rather than humanitarian relief and rescue or recovery. And unless we find out ways how the rescue, recovery, as well as relief can be considered as investable activities, and how do you measure the results of that, this is something will continue to linger. I'm not saying at all this is going to be difficult, impossible, but this is something going to be important in the center of all that happens around social stock exchange idea, especially for the humanitarian agenda to do that. And the last I would like to suggest, again to open the discussion, to say that the social stock exchange, as we hear the details from that, from Gambhir Saab and Gupta Saab and others, is to see that what about the ultra poor and ultra vulnerable in terms of those who are exposed to risk repeatedly and continuously and devastatingly. And for those who not only have no economic capital, but also no social capital. And these are the ones who are excluded, such as single women, for example, Dalits, for example, minorities, ethnic groups, and others. And how will that social stock exchange will be able to address that? And the parallel here is that the economic stock exchange or the financial stock exchange, investment stock exchange, depending upon how you want to put it, has not been really able to address, in spite of the large outreach, the key issues of poverty, development, marching out of the disadvantaged position, backwardness, etc. And will the social stock exchange be able to do better than the stock exchange that we have now? So these are the 3 or 4 ideas about social stock exchange, which are key to moving ahead. I to repeat again that how number one is about investments and social economic investments in social cause. Second is related to the commodification and how relief and rescue and recovery cannot be entirely turned into a commodity. And third is related to those who are excluded even from the social sector itself. So that is something that the social stock exchange for humanitarian agenda will have to look at. With these words, I'd like to thank again to Sphere India, tested by you, and of course, done by Mr. Abraham. And I'll be waiting for the questions if there are any. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you so much, Mihirbai. I think you really set the broad context that where are we coming from for this social sector exchange discussion. And to unpack a bit more about what this social sector exchange is as you know, notified by SEBI also is this is where the non-profit organizations, will be able to register as a separate platform, and they will be able to potentially raise resources required for the social sector. I think the notification has informed about some 15 sectors in which, for which, or the activities linked to which probably the resources can be raised. And these resources can come from the other side of the exchange through the individuals, through general public, through the companies and others. I think the modalities that the profits from the funds in which they will invest, can go toward the social sector programs. And it also brings in, as an exchange, is the element, I think, for those who are investors into it, the investors will be able to claim the tax benefits from their side in terms of their benefits of investments into it. And on the other side, I think the NPOs, non-profit organizations, they will be able to raise potential funds, but it will bring in the essential requirements of going through the social audit. Apart from the other financial audits, it will essentially also require the social audit. I think these are some of the top highlight points of this exchange, and there are more deeper nuances to it. And for that, I think Mihir Bhai has really set the context and also put across some, the burning questions which are on the mind of everyone as this initiative unpacking. I'm sure our future panelists will be dealing more in depth about this, the further nuances of this social exchange, how it's going to function. And I think for that purpose, first of all, I think Next, we have Dr. Garima Didich. As we heard, her rich experience across disciplines and especially her present role of being the faculty within Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, working with Ministry of Corporate Affairs. So Dr. Garima, what do you think? From the how is the Ministry of Corporate Affairs and IICS seeing this development and probably their role in this whole scheme of things? But I think an important question, as you also explained, maybe I would like to understand from your side, the corporate, how they see, their contribution to it, to the exchange. But where do you see that it will be able to address some kind of a mistrust, which the investors generally have when they have to select their the non-profit sector partners, maybe the experience which comes from the CSR Act also. Many of the corporates say that they have issues about the compliance and accountability with the non-profit organization and identifying the right partners. Do you think some of those things will be addressed to this exchange moving forward? And apart from it, we'd like to hear your other perspectives also. So over to you, Dr. Garima. Looking forward to hear from you.
Thank you, Sergio, and thank you, Vikrant, Spare Academy, to initiate this important discussion. Firstly, I express my gratitude for this invitation amongst the leading experts in this domain. Thank you very much for being me here. I will just, all the experts are there and they will really share the real story behind the working group and finally coming this SSE on board, and pleasure to hear them also. Hemant is also there. So yeah, I would just like to, mention that, okay, so when we talk about the corporate perspective, let me just begin by mentioning that how the NGOs, how the non-profit organizations were used to get funds. India has a very rich history of the philanthropic approach, as we have been seeing it since years. And currently there are approximately 31 lakh NGOs which are existing. And their main source of funding is the government or the ministry grant or CSR or a foreign contribution or a very minor of individuals also we can mention. These are the main sources. Around the, during this COVID era, we have seen them suffering a lot because of, everything closed, and there were a lot of issues for survival of those NGOs as well. Now, when these NGOs are like more dependent on the CSR funds, which is a mandate anyway organizations have to do. And today we are moving from the talks of CSR to ESG, right? I'm just making a link of that. So we are talking about environmental, social, governance. We are talking about, Milton Friedman versus Freeman, the scholarship theory, and saying that, businesses have to, think more about the social impact also. If we go back to the intent of CSR law, the bill, where the company's bill came, it clearly says that the reason of having this mandate is to bridge the gap, to provide the expertise which the corporates have. And I can very well relate this with the social stock exchange also about, bridging the gap or the trust deficit between the donor and the receiver. So the idea is that now companies have to really think about the impact, impact as in a social objectives. What are their contributions? So one is that through CSR is very much there. Now this social stock exchange, as we know that it is just one of the segment under the capital market regulator, and India being, I can say that amongst the trendsetter in this regard. There are other countries also, but we are among the trendsetter to bring this under the capital market regulation. So the idea is that that those NPOs can also raise funds, right? And particularly reduce the trust deficit between the funder and the receiver. There are several ways. I'm sure the experts will talk about all those things of zero coupon or the development impact bond particularly. When we say development impact bond, which is one of the way of raising fund, that means some financial return to investor. even through the CSR, we have been advocating this theory. Now companies are coming to us and asking us, whether we should do this particular, there are certain challenges also. They say that if we do social, we invest in the social stock exchange, does it mean that we are complying with section 135? Do we have to still do CSR? These are the very basic questions, but many of organizations are asking such. And we say that the CSR is a law that has a threshold when you have certain particular profits. And here also we see that there is a threshold. There are those 15 plus, kind of a list given, or investing in that thing. But certainly it is nothing to replace CSR. So firstly, I always clarify that way, that it is not to replace CSR. It is basically to strengthen those NPOs, because we know that currently, the CSR fund is huge, the 25,000 crore plus, but the bigger chunk is being done through their own foundations. So it doesn't even reach to those NPOs, NGOs, trusts, societies, etc. And there are really very good organizations, non-profit organizations, who are doing wonderful job in meeting the social objectives. So it is the idea is that there was a lack of trust between the donor and the receiver. There was a no one single window available for claimants. Also, this kind of a social stock exchange is strengthening the disclosure mechanism. So there's a lack of disclosure of funds raised vis-a-vis funds utilized. So it can have the entire gambit of that. Then also recently the MCA has launched this national CSR exchange platform. So see, I mean, the intent everywhere, the government is thinking a lot about disclosures and self-governance mechanism, wherein the companies, even now the NPOs will come forward and disclose. And with an increasing focus on ESG and sustainability and all that, the foreign investors are seriously thinking about ESG parameters. This will have a huge opportunity to raise funds from NPOs also, by highlighting their disclosure mechanism, by highlighting that how they are meeting the social objectives. So again, I would just say that the main thing is to reduce the gap, and as the social stock exchange brings together, the impactful investors and NPOs whose principal business is primarily a social welfare. So we can see that the conventional capital has been replaced by the social capital. There is an unlocking the larger pool of the social capital, and onboarding the investors and providing the confidence amongst the smaller NGOs that they can also raise funds. And there's no need, because lot many, these, I can use the word activist or the NGOs, they always say that they have to go out and ask for the money. So for this, we all believe that this is going to be a beautiful platform. And again, this is very much aligned with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs objective of this CSR exchange, or even for that matter, the CSR law. So I would stop here and would be happy to take questions. And renowned people are here. Professor Amita Singh, I would love to hear all of them.
Great, thank you so much, Garimaji. I think you really brought some very excellent linkages from the experiences of the CSR law also, and how is this particular initiative moving forward is able to address some of the trust issues of the investment, and also encouraging the welfare programming. I think as an initiative, we are aiming to look at more demystifying it for the benefit of our participants, and I think through this program recording, many others also. We will really like to understand, how it's going to function, from where when you say investors, as we give an example of a stock exchange, but as how social sector exchange is going to be different from that, where the money is going to come in, how the investors are going to get benefited out of it, where is their motivation to be part of this. And then on the other side, those NPOs who are going to be receiving funds and going to be investing it in terms of the social welfare programs and all. So what are the compliances and the regulatory framework for them to measure the social impact, and how everything together going to function. I think the person to explain this to us is, I think, can be nobody better than Hemant. We heard is some of our excellent initiative which he and his team has led, and also the behind this whole social exchange initiative. So Hemant, we will really like to hear from you how this whole thing is going to function and going to benefit everybody, including investors. And more nuanced question could be, how one get listed on social sector exchange, and then also in terms of the what we're talking about, the zero coupon. What do these terms mean? If you can explain it for the benefit of our participants and also the larger audience whom we are going to reach through this webinar, it will be helpful. So over to you, Hemant.
Thank you, Vikrant. And you guys can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Great. And thank you very much for having me here. It's an excellent forum that you've created to talk about this initiative. And I'll break what I'm going to talk about in the next 5 to 10 minutes into 2 or 3 parts. Okay, the first is to kind of set a context as to how the whole thing evolved. The second, get into a little bit of detail on what is listing, what is zero coupon, zero principle. And the third would be to also talk about the journey ahead, or at least from where I sit, what I see to be the journey ahead. So by way of context, I'm sure a lot of you know the story already, but 2019, Finance Minister announced it, the Social Stock Exchange. Shortly thereafter, SEBI called upon us at BSE Samman from a consultation perspective to talk about how do we set up an entity like that. And the first working committee that was created had a lot of very eminent people from the social space, both from an investor point of view and a implementation point of view. And that working committee created a broad framework for the social stock exchange. And the 3 important things that kind of came out of that document was, the first was the fact that the stock exchange will be a segment on the existing exchange. It will not be an entirely new entity. The second was the creation of a zero coupon, zero principle instrument as a way of creating a security, tradable is the wrong word to use, but a capital market security out of a donation or a grant. And the third was the establishment of something called the Capacity Building Fund as an enabler for the social stock exchange, especially for the not-for-profit organizations who are not familiar with the capital market space. Right. This was shortly followed by a larger technical group that comprised of a lot of representation from the NPO community, from the stock exchanges, from the social impact investors. That were the term of reference for the technical group had been to create an operating framework out of the recommendations that were made by the working committee. And that is where the concept, and this is a segue into the next part of what I was going to talk about, which is essentially what the technical group did was to divide the concept of a social enterprise coming on to social stock exchange into 2 parts. The first was that the organization has to establish the fact that their primary purpose for existence is social impact, also called primacy of social impact, right? So any organization, for-profit or not-for-profit, has to first establish the primacy of social impact. What do you mean by primacy of social impact? Broadly, again, there's a lot of detailed stuff behind this, but broadly, there are 3 parts to it. The first is that the organization has to be working in one of 15 or 16 areas of focus that were taken from the Schedule 7, from the various parameters that are used by UN, by Niti Aayog in judging what is the social sector, and including the SDGs. And so the first filter is that, is your organization working in one of these areas? The second is that the majority of what you do has to be in one of these areas. So you can't say, I did one project, sometime. So 67% was what we debated about, 75 versus 67. We finally settled upon 67, or 2/3 of your work has to be in one or more of those focus areas. And what do you mean by work? Work was further quantified as either your number of customers, your revenue, or your expenses has to be consumed by one of these areas, one or more of these areas. And the third was that you cannot be a part of certain structures. So as an example, a religious or a political structure, a housing company apart from somebody that's working on affordable housing, the corporate foundations, and there was a list of organizations types of organizations that cannot be a part of the social stock exchange. Once you passed this initial filter of primacy of social intent, you then, if you look at the flow, it kind of divides itself into whether you're a for-profit organization or not-for-profit organization. The for-profit structure fits into the existing capital market structure, which means that there are essentially 3 levels of stock exchanges broadly. Right, you have the startup platforms, you have the SME segment, and then you have the main board. So depending on the size, the nature of the for-profit enterprise, they would then list their equity or the bonds that they want to raise money through on the appropriate segment. And then they would be governed by the eligibility criteria, the reporting criteria, whatever, of that segment. Right? On the not-for-profit side, this was a segment that had not been addressed by the capital markets space. So again, we broadly used the section 135 as a guide in terms of determining the listing requirements. There was one additional filter that we used. There are lakhs of companies in this country, but not all of them are listed on the stock exchange. There is a certain compliance cost that comes with coming onto a platform like the stock exchange, and keeping in mind that the cost has to be an affordable number. There are size criteria that have also been put in terms of how big you have to be in order to come onto the social stock exchange. Apart from that, by and large, it is the normal, you have to be a society, trust, or Section 8, track record of 3 years, etc., etc. Right? In addition to that, the basic criteria for registration, there are also disclosures that the for-profit and not-for-profit have to make regarding their vision, mission, social impact created so far, track record. And in order to create transparency around especially the social impact part, the technical group also entrusted the Chartered Accountant Institute to come up with social auditing standards, and also but also recommended that they can be self-regulatory organizations that social auditors can be a part of, right? And these social auditors will act as certifying agents for social impact that's been made by these organizations that want to list. Now the other thing that distinguishes for-profit and not-for-profit is that while a for-profit entity, when it lists, is also simultaneously raising funds, a not-for-profit organization can actually register on the social stock exchange after undergoing the eligibility, etc., but doesn't have to immediately raise funds. The raising of funds by a not-for-profit is typically associated with an activity, with a project, right? So recognizing the fact that from a timing perspective, the two may not be synchronized, not-for-profit organization can register for a future fundraising effort. And as and when they want to go to the stock market and raise funds, we can do so using what Vikrant talked about, the zero coupon, zero principal instrument. It's called a zero coupon, zero principal instrument because coupon or the interest, it doesn't carry any interest. principal or the payment at maturity, there is no payment at maturity because you are giving a donation with expectation of getting a social return rather than a financial return. Right? So therefore, the term zero coupon, zero principal, ZC, ZP, or as it's also called. There are also other attributes of the ZC, ZP I should talk about. First is that it has to be in a dematerialized form. So if you look at the capital markets, most of us, if we hold any investments, hold them in electronic form with a depository, right? And we can trade online. We don't necessarily hold physical share certificates. Well, some of us still do, but by and large, 80 to 90% is held in electronic form. Zero ZCZP has to be issued in a dematerialized or digital form. The second is that the minimum issue size for a ZCZP is determined to be 1 crore. So your requirement for raising funds has to be 1 crore or more. The third is that the minimum subscription can be 2 lakhs, which means the investor, the so-called investor, social investor, has to put in a minimum of 2 lakhs into one of these instruments. However, before you can come to the stock exchange and raise funds in such a way, you also have to provide the stock exchange with an offer document, which lays out the contours of why you're raising money. How long is the project going to last? What is it going to do? What will be the outcome parameters? How will you measure success, etc., right? All of that has to be documented in a prescribed form by the NPO or the not-for-profit organization, which will then come on to the social stock exchange and have to be in principle approved by the social stock exchange. It will also be displayed on the website of the social stock exchange for 21 days for people to comment on if they have any positive or negative feedback regarding the project or the document. And once that in principle approval has been given, the instrument can be used to raise funds. Right? As of now, we don't anticipate what is called trading in that instrument, in the sense we don't anticipate buying and selling of that instrument, but the human mind is quite ingenious and we never know what lies in the future, right? So that's broadly, and of course, right, there are additional disclosures. So there is an annual disclosure that is to be made for any entity which is either registered or listed on the social stock exchange. And there are also event-based disclosures. So if you have a zero coupon, zero principal instrument which has been listed and is still in its, the period is still going on, it's not matured yet, and there is any event that has a material impact on the outcomes of the project, you're supposed to declare that event also to the social stock exchange within 7 days of the event happening. Right? So that's broadly the process or the operations of actually coming onto the social stock exchange for a for-profit or not-for-profit organization. The third part that I mentioned at the beginning was what lies ahead. Right, to my mind, and I think I quoted this in some other webinar also, this is 1.0 for the social stock exchange. It's a completely new construct. And we are in a phase where this is going to evolve. I think we look back 5 years from now and look at what we started with and where we are 5 years later. It might be very, very different where we'll start today. What it looked like 5 years from now, I really don't know. But I do anticipate that there will be more and this is outside the scope of the committee, etc. But from a social sector perspective, I do anticipate more collective instruments, right, like a social impact bond or a social development bond, instruments like that coming on to the social stock exchange. As a part of the technical group recommendation, we also tried to make an existing structure called a social venture fund that is already there in the regulations, more market friendly. So I do anticipate more of social venture fund kind of instruments coming on board, and perhaps other, creative financial instruments that will uh, make financial and social sense, especially for the not-for-profits coming onto the social stock exchange. We're in the early stages, like I said, and I think a lot more is going to come down the road. So with that, Vikrant, back to you. I know you have some space towards the end of the program for Q&A. So
yes, sir, definitely. I think very useful, but I think one quick question and maybe brief one, you can respond to it. Say if I'm an investor, what's the motivation for investor? If they're investing in stock exchange, they're looking for profits, and so here again, maybe it's a social good and all, but what do you see is there for the investor in this?
no, I think why. So if you go back to an existential question of why the social stock exchange has been created, right? Why can't I just give donations? So from an investor, again, social investor viewpoint, a ZP is nothing but a donation or a grant, right? The only thing is, like Meher said, I think earlier, was that the organization you're giving money to is hopefully a reputed organization with a proven track record, right? You're not just giving it to somebody who told you on the phone. B, on a periodic basis, you have visibility into what is happening, right? And in a structured form, you have visibility into what's happening with your money. Today, that's the structure doesn't exist, and it's up to the implementation agency to provide you with what's happening with the project. And the third is this whole concept of a social audit, right? And again, social audit, to my mind, is again a term that's going to evolve a lot, right? There are no standards that exist today. I think ICI, through their paper, has made an excellent first start to this whole process. And again, a lot more to come. I think more than any other sphere in the social stock exchange, this whole social audit function is going to evolve a lot more. Right. So those three things I think are top of mind for it from an investor point of view. And from a fundraising point of view, of course, there are
plenty. Yeah, great. Thanks a lot, Hemantji. I think it's really making a lot of sense, and I think a very exciting initiative. Thanks for all your contribution towards making it happen. Also, I think it's from for all the additional benefits, which of selecting the right organizations, the social audit, and the listings, the declarations, organization need to make time to time. So all this, what could be the motivation for investors? But when I see it, the CSR is essentially, mandated, to be invested. But here is something kind of a voluntary investment, and I think it will be really exciting to see in time to come how it increases the giving, the contribution, to overall giving contribution in India. I think that will be an exciting, future to look to. But an important aspect to touch on what was the social audit part of it, I think, which brings it. And for discussing more deeper about that is, I think we have the right next speaker, Mr. Vikas Gambhir, who's executive director from Grant Thornton and is overlooking the social sector audits and social sector developments in Grant Thornton, Bharat. And as Hemant shared, that ICI has presented something, on the social sector audit, social audit part of it within their standard, but we have generally seen the ICAI standards are more financial compliances and the financial auditing. I think that's what the chartered accountants have been doing it. When it comes to social audit and the social processes, which a lot of NGOs and corporates have been following it so far, it's entirely entire details, entire set of standards which have been going on. So Vikas, we'd like to understand more deeper from you. How do you see, what kind of a standard or what kind of a processes will be involving for social audit, and what is there with the ICAI or organization like yours from the social audit point of view? And I think I would also pick it from again what Hemant said. There could be a self-governing body of social auditors to come up to look at evolving more practices and standards around it. So what do you see the developments around these in future? So over to you, Vikas. Looking forward to hear from you.
Thanks, Vikrant, and thanks for Academy to have me on this panel discussion. Great to hear Meher Bhai, Dr. Garima, and Mr. Hemant on this. And you're right. One is of course the formulation. There has been a journey for past couple of years. It had its own risks, challenges, and historically, if we see, out of seven, social stock exchange got, created worldwide, starting from Brazil in 2003, four have shut down. There are three which are in running as of now. And of course, there were always cross learning from the failures which happened. But of course, having unlearned and relearned a lot of things, I think probably this is the first time a security market regulator worldwide probably has come up with a framework, which is really good to have with the experience and the kind of technical group and working group they sort of curated. It took a little while, but I think the times were different. The times were tough also with COVID, but good to see that happen now. In a mode wherein we can through this platform can ideate, talk through various FAQs, which would be helpful, for passing on the messaging also to various stakeholders. Now coming to the social audit aspect. Before that, I'll just quickly also touch base on a couple of the risk factor challenges which probably this will unfold as we go along. A lot of us done in the paper which has come out. A lot of clarifications have also come in, but there's still some challenges I foresee, and we as a firm are also looking at. Now, from a I would say external factors which are impacting the current framework. So we have regulators which are, say for example, the FDA policy at present does not, allow investment in zero coupon, zero, principal bond, which of course things will undergo change. Now, from a, if specifically, if I say on the social audit, I mean, to begin with, now, as you rightly said, there's no, benchmark or a framework as of now. Of course, the matured or more engaged owners have been doing it. And in that also, depending upon which thematic area you have been involved, the way you curate the milestones, a lot of things have been done more customized basis of program. But yeah, going forward, I think the audit of social impact, raising fund has to come under, a bit more, I would say, standardized aspect. Whether some of elements, as you rightly said, maybe ICI would be having more on the financial side, but I think the way in few discussions it got sort of unfolded, there would be I would say a broad framework that will also get unfolded. There could be a separate sustainability directorate, which will give those notification guidance. Now, the function might include empanelment, registration of social auditors, laying out standards of professional conduct, even suspension, cancellation of membership of social audits, prescribing a separate code of conduct for, social auditors, and frame standards covering aspects, which would not only to talk about the scope, the engagement, I would say acceptance. They will outline basic principles, and I think there would be a more standard approach, methodology, and procedures outlined. And this would also sort of push to create documentation in a more standardized format. And overall, a template on the assurance report coming out of this, social audit would also get, I would say, structured. So as Hemant also mentioned, that probably from now till 5 years down the line, a lot of things will get evolved. And I'm sure, under that social audit element would also get evolved quite a bit. And I think one encouraging part is that nowhere an attempt has been made to just impose something which is there in existence outside the country also. So I think that is an encouraging point, that we need to, sort of unlearn, relearn, replicate what has been in existence, and try to come up with more standardized, templates, way of conducting it. This is whatever thematic area and, intervention area under different projects that will come under, And other than, I think, social audit on the FCRA side also, I'll just touch base that right now the policy intervention would be required from those regulators. I mean, CSR, of course, being spoken on FCRA. I think that's, say, for example, Section 8 of FCRA prohibits, foreign contribution towards speculative business. So now speculative business has got a definition, but then, having exemption on social stock exchange done, if, say, for example, a foreign donor has to participate, and that clarity also is required as whether foreign entities shall be eligible in the funds as a donors, or will not be taking decision or discretion on deployment on funds to specific NPOs. And similarly, there will be elements of compliances on the taxation side also, wherein clarity would be required and unfolded whether the philanthropic donors to claim 100% say tax exemptions for their donations, investment made in securities instruments of NPO, be tax deductible, corporate to deduct that CSR expenditure that goes to the SSE from their taxable income, or probably the first time, retail investors to avail 100% tax exemption on their investment in the SSE mutual fund structure, or, that's subject to that overall limit. So, and then, removing the 10% cap of income eligible for deduction by ATG. So all these elements also need to be, I would say, unfold as it goes. On social audit side, also one thing I would like to point that, the more engaged or more matured donors as of now also are ensuring that, and that happens largely in consultation with the, NGO, that how would you measure impact also? Because there are a lot of elements that has to go beforehand, when you define the KPIs, probably you do the need assessment also, mid-level and end. And then there is a very regular monitoring and evaluation which happens over a period of time. And any deviation happening has to be then, in consultation with the donor, has to be deliberated, discussed, recalibrated, and then, maybe the goalpost has to undergo change. I think over here, of course, there would be elements of disclosures. But I think at the time of raising capital, one is that, social audit will happen down the line later. But I think all those elements has to somewhere get built up in the prospectus itself also, because that will give a very clear, I would say, guidelines also, and a clarity to the investor at that stage that yes, this is the way the social impact would be sort of, one has been curated, probably monitored also, and this is the impact, in numbers and value, one can then, foresee as an investor. Because here, we need to also be cognizant of the fact that investors who are coming on board would be a mix of, the funds who have got reasonable capacity in terms of understanding what a social impact, social audit will bring. And there'll be a lot of, small, big time personal philanthropic, initiatives of people or a group or community who will put in their money. And of course, with the trust and faith that, that organization, while reaching it this stage, submitting the prospectus, have all the tick in the boxes done. And probably, they can, on a cursory look, can have a look that, okay, fine, they can expect that social audit will validate certain things at the end of the, program, which has been indicated as of now. And it should be very transparent. And again, as like Hemant mentioned, that any disclosures within that, journey has or there could be a possible impact on the outcome, should be disclosed. And that obviously from a social audit perspective needs to be, taken in perspective, inclusive of what has been, submitted also at the beginning. So these elements from a, I would say from a social audit perspective had to, evolve. And some of the other, I would say, challenges, also we see that several not-for-profits find it difficult to comply with, certain disclosure listing standard, proposed disclosures. I mean, the good part which has happened in past couple of years with the change of law, whether it's on the CSR side, whether it's on the FCRA, I think a lot of focus has been brought on compliances. And thankfully, what it has done that, and of course, with the impact assessment also, being brought up. Now, many organizations think about it. And earlier, what used to happen that these were not so important or non-negotiable sort of, things. Now, they know that either they build capacities or they take support from outside to make sure that they are compliant on all these aspects. So probably the big NGOs would still, I would say, and probably they would be probably the first comers on the exchange. But I would still look at it that interim way it will also educate the midterm organizations, NGOs, to educate themselves to unlearn and relearn from what has been submitted, and learn that probably they should meet the disclosure norms and other related standards which are required for the listing be adhered to in the beginning. And then rise of, I think, new intermediaries also, which like the impact assessors, will require new regulation from probably SEBI to govern their actions as well, because that is also something which I mean, it will unfold as we go. So it would be interesting time, of course, for the social audit piece, to. But thankfully, we have got models and we have got proven impact reports and social audit already happening in the country from where the base can start. And I'm sure the ICI would also be starting the prelim framework from there itself, and not only just get carried away by only the financial element. And I think maybe it could be initially good to have, and then maybe non-negotiable parameters getting built up in next couple of years. And one would also need to see the full cycle getting completed. So anything getting listed now, and depending upon the duration of the program, I would say the role would come maybe after 1.5, 2 years or 3 years, depending upon the program. But certain inputs have to go in now at the time of filing also, and that's the way we foresee this space will unfold. Happy to take questions. Yeah. Can't hear you, Vikrant.
Thanks a lot, Vikasji. And I think that's where perhaps some of this capacity building fund component with the social stock exchange also need to look at, investments in building these benchmarks and capacities around there. And of course, the awareness around there is also. Very rightfully, you brought an aspect of, that this will be leveraged first by the big NPOs who already have established practices and who also have, some of the who also have the resources probably to leverage any opportunities coming like that, and that definitely put us in a contradiction with a lot of a global discourse happening post World Humanitarian Summit and Grand Bargain about localization, empowering more local actors, and but the frameworks like this and the developments like this actually put them to disadvantage, and maybe we need to look at from the more capacity building resources and other things, that how more and more local and maybe smaller actors are also able to leverage these opportunities. And with this, I think I'll take the discussion. I think rightfully next our speaker is Dr. Amita Singh. He comes up a large experience from the academia as well as the civil society perspective, and I think the network which she's leading now. So Dr. Amita, what do you see? These kind of initiatives have its own pros and cons. Now, I think we have had a larger part of cons we have discussed, but I'm very sure there are a lot of cons, which emerge, which help us think further through this. Do you think the lot of structuralization which is coming up, it takes away, it ultimately takes away the freedom and the free way of working through which the civil society earlier evolved, unrestricted and a free-spirited, free things, thinking it do the thing that space get restricted by this developments and more compliance and more regulation coming in, and also how it's impacting localization, I think is what's the discussion which Vikas Gambhir has touched upon one aspect, that more bigger NGOs will be able to leverage it first. So these are some of the questions which are evolving, and what do you see what are other cons, maybe some of pros and cons to this development, to this program, the platform, and how see it's going to impact the development sector in future. So over to you, Dr. Amita.
Thank you, Vikrantji. I've been noticing that at the end of every talk, you have some very crisp interjections, and you are picking out the most muted reality out of the whole talk. And wonderful, because it sets very good platform for me to take it forward. Thank you, Meher Bhai, for unfolding the concerns, and for Garima ji, very nicely explained. And Hemant ji, Vikas ji, you have really deepened the understanding on this SSEs. And it makes my task easier. Nonetheless, the issues of concern that Vikrant ji has asked is a very important aspect, and I think I'll try to answer some of them. The major part that I see here is a semantic issue. Social stock exchange. What is a stock? Stock is a tradable thing. It's a tradable stock. You transact business on stock. A stock is something that is measurable. It is tangible. Is a society, the nature of the society, something like that? Is a community something like that? So the basic understanding that goes behind the semantics of social stock exchange is, I think, deeply flawed, because a community and interacting with the community and interacting with society can never be a tradable stock. It can never be something which is pre-decided. It is something which is, the NGO, the non-profit is growing with the community, and the community interaction is growing with the NGOs and people who are working with them. It happens both sides, and both are growing. And in the process, for ages, for years, they work together, and then the fruits are visible. There is no performance evaluation that can happen on the standards prescribed by somebody sitting outside and telling that this is the performance standard. You can't evaluate performance standard, because I think that is very bad parenting if somebody is putting a toolkit or a regulatory framework for a child to grow. There's a huge gestation period. The results are visible after many years. And sometimes the results are not even measurable, but it is showing in the larger national framework. Manrega, for example, take up the policies that survived the society during the COVID times. So, many of these frameworks come up after years of efforts. It's not something that you put something on one side and the other side, the product is coming out. And also, it's not securities, nor investors need to expect ownership, because in, SEBI, if you look at the framework of SEBI, the SEBI Act completely is pro-investor. If you look at that, right in the beginning, the concept is investors, owners, how they should be protected, how their interest should be protected. That the framework itself is very, very investor oriented. And the other things which look very good in public administration, like, their transparency, disclosure that pull you towards them, they are actually very, very muted, and sometimes not even necessary in a social sector. So then what is a social stock? It's a very potential resource. A potential resource is something like a green grass, a tree, and a plant, which is growing. And as it grows, it reveals the colors of its development. It is not something that is a package and you can measure it. So this is one. The second point that comes to my mind is how the idea was developed. Well, there are all the scholars here. The idea of social stock exchange emerged in 2019 from, talking about how the funds would be raised. It's kind of an enticement. You'll get more funds because we are raising an electronic fund platform. And the working group that was formed, if you look at the membership of the working group that was formed, it had, a different sort of people. Ishat Hussain was from the Tata Sons, was heading it. It's a very framework which may not suit, I'm sure, about 3 million NGOs that are working here. It may not suit majority of them, because we can go into the details, but the time is short. Then it is within the securities market, then NABARD comes in. But the most interesting part, if some people have noticed, out of 3 million plus NGOs here, The whole framework is on the 991 comments received. This is an extremely strange, undemocratic way of deciding on a framework for the whole social sector. Well, now, this aside, let me take up the major points that come into the discussion today, the question especially that Vikranji has asked me. First is that the pros and cons you asked. This is under the regulatory ambit of SEBI. This is the primary point that has been mentioned at the beginning of the social stock exchange. And what is SEBI? Do we know what a SEBI is? Take up section 11 of SEBI, the powers and functions of SEBI. What does it say? It's draconian. Now look at that. I don't think all the NGOs are going to die out. You know, the non-profit is going to wilt out. If you look at that, number one, duty of the board to protect interest of investors in securities and development, regulate the security market as it seems fit. This is the first objective. The second is regulating business in stock exchange. Now, social exchange, you remove the securities and it becomes social exchange. Regulating, including the share transfers, agents, intermediaries, sub-brokers, brokers, there are lots of entities, intermediaries that work in the area, and they are all to be regulated by SEBI. Then we go further, then regulating venture capital funds, which would now be rechristened as impact funds. I don't know, I'll talk about it. Then, you know, now you see the 2016 and 2018 amendments into this section. SEBI the board may take measures to undertake inspection of any book, any public listed company, which will now be social stock NGOs, where the board has reasonable grounds to believe that such company has been indulging in insider trading, fraudulent and unfair trade practices. Now, who's going to do that? I'm just surprised, because the major problem of governance is that people who actually inspect are themselves not knowing what have they come here to inspect, because they have never been there. They are just appointed by the government and they are asked to inspect a particular area, and they don't know what community work or the non-profit work is, what is philanthropy is. So we face this problem, a number of examples on that, especially, you know, when we had been working on the closed tea gardens of the Dwar region. There were innumerable committees that were formed. There were people inspecting around. Similarly, that happens, you know, post-disaster. In the villages, there are these government assessment committees are going. And the problem is that half of them do not understand what exactly has happened to people. Inspection of books without prejudice to the provisions contained in subsections, all of these above. It can even restrain, impound, retain the proceeds, and freeze the bank accounts. So are the NGOs and nonprofits prepared to go into all that? It takes ages to raise up an NGO. It takes ages to raise up philanthropic ideas and to work on the ground and interact with the community. And then there is an outsider sitting over there and doing all this task, and even levy penalty. That is after the 2018 amendment to the SEBI Act. Now this SEBI will be the boss of nonprofits. All right, this is the first thing. And SEBI has a different mandate. You know, if you look into the whole of the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, but this mistake has already been committed earlier by putting the Ministry of Cooperation under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Now, Ministry of Cooperation was under the Agriculture Ministry, and where it would have functioned, and it had been functioning, it would have functioned very well with the Panchayati Raj Ministry. What is MHA going to do if they have to work on the community cooperation at the ground level? Now, the second point that is questionable, in fact, the third point that is questionable is the framework of fundraising, which I think Hemant ji has spoken about. I'll have a little different view on that. Now, NGOs and nonprofits have a different way of functioning. Its strength is its persuasive ability. when NGOs, Ramakrishna Mission or other social sector NGOs, they go down to work with people, they show that they are community oriented. They win the hearts. They win, a lot of uh, faith and trust of the people, on the basis of which they get funds. So then you give service. Now, majority of people who are in philanthropy are the people, of course, it's very easy to say that people in the social sector are the people who have come here to earn money. That is the attitude with which the NGOs are being taken in the last few years, last decade or so. But the reality is a large majority of working inside these NGOs are the philanthropists. They have left their IAS positions, cushy jobs as professors, as senior administrators, as director general of police, and they are working over there. Why? Because they thought that it is important that the community becomes empowered, enabled to seek the benefits that the government is giving and which are not reaching them. And even in the legal sphere, if you look at how many of the organizations have worked at the ground level, many of the acts and welfare oriented policies that have been framed by the government in the last 3 decades have been because these NGOs have been working at the community level and people have been empowered. Now, the whole transparency talk that has been going around, I think very few in the corporate world actually know how the idea of transparency came in. In Ratsamund and Ajmer, they were the people, the ordinary uneducated villagers who had barged into the Sarpancha's office, opened up his box and found that the false billing was taking place and all the funds that were coming from the government were being used privately. Now, this is the MKSS, the work that is going on and the right to information. The major laws have been because of the NGO functioning, the non-profit functioning. It has not come from the corporate. It has not come from the government. If you leave it to the government, these progressive ideas would have never come in the constitution or even in law. Then, if you look at this zero coupon, zero principal instruments, the bonds. Now, if we have something like this, first of all, I'm wondering how they're going to apply this. I'm completely, at a loss to understand zero coupon, zero principal bonds and instruments. How are these to be traded over there? If something like that happened, and the government really tries to, I think these are all big words which are being inserted, and nobody has actually thought how this will function at the ground, how this will be enforced, how this will be carried through. Because, it took us almost 2 decades to have the competition commission come up, an appellate authority where people could go and say this has not happened. And it would take up another 20 years to have another appellate authority to hear to the NGOs and the non-profit problems. Otherwise, who can stop? If these are big NGOs which are coming in, as mentioned, because there is a lot of inclination to start with the big NGOs, big names, who are very well settled, who have a name, but there are thousands working who do not have the name, and probably the corporate people are not even knowing that who are these working in extreme tribal areas, but transforming society bit by bit over the years. So, who would stop cartelization? Now, that is again the same problem that we have been having with, raising good competition amongst the companies which are under the ambit of the SEBI. What prevents NGOs from cartelization? Because there will be abuse of dominant position, and the big NGOs will abuse the dominant position. They're definitely going to abuse their relationship with the government. They would also go into some predatory mechanism, to seek funds. What stops? I'm really not able. I would like somebody to enlighten me on that, because what will stop them? If companies have been doing them bid rigging, the same problems that have been there with the companies are going to come into the social stock exchange, because suddenly the NGO will have to work smartly like a company. And if they have to work smartly like a company because they want more funds in a very formalized manner, then what prevents them working like a company? So all these problems, the ailments, the problems, the diseases of the company regulation will come into the NGO. So where do we have the something parallel to the Competition Commission to look into that? I think nobody has ever thought that what will be the fallout, what will happen to the child when the child becomes a teenager. So this is one. Then we have to reinvent another appellate tribunal. Is the trouble worth enough to get your head stuck into? There are many other things that were required to improve the functioning of the NGOs. But why suggest something which is going to create such a turbulence at the grassroots and create new problems which the government is not prepared to address? And by the time, the governments may also change. Now, last part is that the venture funds which have been rechristened as social impact funds. Now, what are these funds like? I was looking into some very interesting areas of the corporate law. These are like angel funds. So the investor is an angel that invests and then looks and waits what happened to its funds. Have they been used properly or not? So that means the NGOs will have to rally around, wag their tails around a corporate, a big company. That see, we are doing so well, you have to fund us. This is like demeaning philanthropy. This is a very serious thing, and I think we need to relook the whole process, and especially some of these issues which are going to be the last nail in the coffin of social sector. That's it. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Amita. I think it's always great listening to you, and I was expecting maybe something of this kind of challenging, questioning thoughts from you. I think this is to help think through. I think in my personal perspective, the genie is out of the bottle, and now it is how others, we see it from different lenses, and how everybody get involved to make it happen. Yeah, and that's what hearing Vikas ji was saying, that maybe out of the 7, 4 have failed worldwide, but I think we all of us together think through and work towards to make it happen. I think make it happen as success, but success for which we set the parameters, taking into right question which you are bringing it up in this discussion. I think the success cannot be without those, including those questions also which you're putting across. Thanks a lot, Dr. Amita, about this. I think we are running out of time also, but we have a very important speaker towards the end, Mr. Justin Kumar, and not taking more time. So Justin, it's a great discussion, a great framework, looking forward further future. But what is the missing element in this? I know there are a lot of questions Dr. Amita raised also now, but what do you see is the missing component in it, and what are your recommendations for future? Over to you, Justin.
Thanks, Vikrant and the Spear Secretariat and my co-panelists. I know I wanted to thank everyone because of the time. And just right away getting into the points raised. I think it's a very good learning opportunity. I think Hemant has completely dissected the process involved in the whole bringing out this SSC. The notification was out on 15th July. And, also the technical group document, which is almost 102 pages. I would recommend Spear India to share it with the members so that they will read, understand what are the process involved, what are the challenges. When Meerji and I talk to each other, is it a boost or is it a bane to civil society organization? That's a question. Only time will tell, is it a boost or a bane to all of us? There are challenges. But when I looked at what are the opportunities we have, I put some, points. I personally feel, any new initiative, because we do not know the pros and cons, I consider it as a welcome initiative. Yet to start the details to be worked out, and the links are not yet available. Only the notification is out. When the registration process is going to start, we are yet to hear from the SSC. Also, I consider this an opportunity to enhance the capacity of the non-profit organization. The civil society, we all know the demand side. We always struggle with the supply. If the supply is coming in a right source, I think I would consider we should welcome, but we need to understand the challenges. The instrument Hemantji talked about, the zero coupon and the zero principal, the social venture fund, mutual fund. These are the ways and means that the fund will be raised, and the details are yet to be worked out. The activities, it's more clarity now than the Schedule 7. Schedule 7 has almost 15 points. I'm glad, I as an organization, we are working in the affordable housing sector. It's, the Schedule 7, it was under the poverty alleviation and the rural development. Now it's very clearly mentioned slum area development. So the activities are more, they're more clarity now than the Schedule 7. The challenges, when you look at it, bringing the NPOs or the NGOs, non-for-profit sector, and the for-profit entity on the same platform, it's a bit difficult to manage. Because as Amitaji also was talking about, the challenges, the dynamics are completely different. So how do we keep the balance? That's, I think, probably the internal group. We can take it further with the working group, with the Hemantji and people like Vikas. And people are there, we can take it forward. And I have little, question or a concern on the capacity building fund. The aims to raise 100 crore. Basically to provide the capacity of the entity and the civil society organizations. Now, how do we keep the what is the ratio of spending? It's what will be the ratio, not the ratio of spending, internal versus external. We wanted to see that a more capacity building, the ratio is coming to the civil society organization rather than internal or inside capacity building. That point we need to keep in mind. Again, the other some challenges, we need more clarity on the role of social auditors. It's good to have the control mechanism, but rather than a control mechanism, I feel it should be an enabling mechanism. Hence, the auditor should know the process and the dynamics of the civil society. It's the more beyond the financial audit. Amitaji also was bringing out, the inspector Raj should not be the approach rather than a capacity building, because the space we work NGOs are very different from the financial world. I hope that balance will be, maintained. The public disclosure of the NPO's document in the public domain. Again, currently we are sending all the documents to the income tax department. When you put it on the public domain, who will scrutinize, whether it's for the more public scrutiny, whether it will be a more helping environment, or it's a more criticism, that we need to see. While established, the NPOs will have more capacity and bandwidth. Again, Amitaji brought out that point. What will happen to the smaller grassroots level partners? How are we going to take them along together so that no one left behind? The keeping that balance of established NGOs versus the informal or a grassroots level NGOs. These are some of the points I thought it's the important points to be addressed. We will take it to the smaller group, and we should invite more questions and more clarity. I would recommend, people to read the technology group, technical group documents in detail. So only the time will tell, is it a boost for civil society organization, or is it going to be more a control mechanism? But I am personally, my view is it's a welcome initiative, but we are yet to see the results. I leave it to my other co-panelists also to give their views. But I, as a part of the Sphere network, it's an opportunity to open this topic, though it's too early. There are more detailed stuff to be worked out and to be put in the public domain. But it's an opportunity for us to, educate our civil society. Is it going to be a helpful movement or not? Yeah. Thanks. Over to Vikrant and the team.
Great. Thank you so much, Justin. I think you have really brought up some good points and also summarized the overall discussion. I clearly see, I think the question also is 100 crores sufficient enough for a fund for capacity building, which would be required for an initiative like this, if the quantum of it itself perhaps can be increased. I think it's more about time to tell. I'll open up the floor for questions from the participants who have been listening all this while. So please feel free, Siljo, kindly moderate the questions from the floor, be it in the chat group or if you're going to give them the audio access. Over to you, Siljo.
Yes, sir, definitely. So we have got a very good discussion till now. We heard all of this, and now definitely there will be a lot of queries participants will be having. So two ways you have: either you can put it in the chat box, and since we are running short of time, we can take one or two questions. If you want to speak out, you can may raise your hand. So first we have got one person. I'll just give you the right to unmute.
There are a few in the chat box, Seljo. You can read those
Yes.
questions also. Yeah.
Yeah, sure, sir. So Parul Sheth, would you like to ask any questions?
Yes, sir. I want to ask this question that, see,
Can you
we
please
are
introduce yourself first, please? One liner.
sure. Yes, my name is Parul Sheth. I am from an organization called Shaisha. We are based, we are working with on child with children's perspective in Gujarat. I want to ask this question that as a grassroots small scale organization, how can we manage, we are working on a smaller scale with more qualitative work, lot of long-term process-oriented work. How can we get the support from SSE, because they want like a big numbers and immediate prompt results and so on. And we are not doing it like putting children to school, and number-based work is not there. We are doing a lot of process-orienting transformation work. It takes time. So how can we get support for such kind of initiative, especially when we are working on a smaller scale from such SSC? That's my question. Thank you.
Mirji, you wanted to answer, or Vikrant, who is going to answer that one? I have something to add, probably.
But I answered actually in the message itself, as it was Mr. Abraham had said. And the point is that yes, it will be have to these kind of organizations are kind of something which is between social movement and social organization, which is not corporatized and which is not, so to speak, turned into very measurable. They will have a fair amount of difficulty with that. And about that list to start with, Amitati has already enlisted. The further to that list will be the, we don't know what will be the social impact of the social exchange. And in the whole social sector. So, Parliament, that still remains to be addressed as the SSC comes into some shape. Thank you.
Can I try to answer that question?
Please, ma'am, go ahead.
Yeah, the problem with the smaller NGOs is going to be immense, in the sense that anything that they wish to do will be dependent on their prior registration of the NPO. Now, prior registration would mean that they have already been inspected for whatever they have been doing. And if they are registered, then other things would be accordingly. And there should not be a problem unless there are problems with the funding requirements, or the problem with the budgeting, as it seems to be right now. But the thing is that even now, the unlimited role of SEBI is making the whole situation very vague, fuzzy, and the limits of authority have not been defined anywhere. And this will be a crucial context in times to come.
Sure, Justin, sir, would you like to add? She was also mentioning that since the work is on a smaller scale, so there, as per the new SSC, there is a limit that minimum 1 crore requirement is there. And so those things also, if you could address, how can a smaller scale NGOs who require a smaller scale for implementing their projects, how can they also get benefited through this?
No, I think the annual turnover is 10 lakhs. Hemant can, make that clarity. I think the up to 10 lakhs, any NGOs are, consider. The other one is, how do you do the process? And there are, even where if you are working on a process oriented work, need not to be an infrastructure development, still you can develop your own indicators. So you develop the indicators and tell this is my indicator, these are my benchmark, I'll be, achieving those indicators. So the social auditors will look at the indicators and to see whether you have achieved or not. So whether it's a qualitative or quantitative, I think still you can develop an indicator. Hemant, you want to address?
No, absolutely. I mean, you're spot on. I think you answered it better than I could have, but absolutely.
Thank you so much. So I think we can go to the next question. Anita Reku, would you also like to post
Yeah,
a
I have
question?
a question. One of the things in the whole process that is laid down in the social sector exchange, from your input to processes to impact, there's a lot of paperwork that is involved, and which means that the current NGO structures, if you really look at, we have one person who's a postgraduate, and probably rest of the community people are possibly a graduate or less than a graduate, unless until they're very big organizations. And I think while we say there's a capacity building fund, on the other side, we have actually downsized the spending of the NGO in terms of the manpower that they can really put in. I think this is something that we really need to think of. And I don't see a funding for helping them in terms of writing a proposal. How do you go about writing the KPIs? How do you really help them in that process? Because that itself is a huge task by itself. That's number one. The second one is in terms of, even if you have, like I might be a 10 lakhs NGO, suddenly you say that I can only come in for a 1 crore. It's like, how am I going to incrementally grow to that extent? And how do you really manage? The third thing as a question I have is that we have certain movements which are led by the community, especially the NGOs also. If you look at the HIV/AIDS intervention, there are sex worker intervention, there are MSM interventions. I don't see them having a space within this whole complex structure. Thank you.
Yeah. Vikrant, you want to take the question?
Anyone?
Thank you so much, Anita ji, for raising these points. And I think some of them have already been discussed, that maybe the smaller NGOs, one is more capacity building, collectivism, networking, I think, through which we can probably look at possible opportunities for them. But this aspect of community movements, I think these CBOs and community movements, and a lot of work happen, grassroots works happen through them. I think that's, for them, you're raising a very valid question. But maybe, some kind of again, maybe a new set of organizing these movements and supporting them through this initiative. I'm very sure there could be thinking and creative solutions to be provided through that also. And then I think where we are on this webinar as Fair India Academy, the work of our academy is not just webinars and debates. I think we are looking at these as a forums to bring different stakeholders together, and we all listen to each other's voices, think through it, and then create more stronger collective processes ahead. I think that's something is which Sphere India as a collective will continue to support here, and we will take forward these discussions from here into the next possible set of action which could be carried forward. Probably more engagement with the SEBI and more engagement with even the ICAI and other stakeholders involved, so that we can inform them through the learning. And clearly there's a need for the entire process to be more informed from the social sector stakeholders point of view. So I think those kind of opportunities would be created in future, and we hope that, I think, with all this intervention, everybody's effort together, we see a successful initiative ahead. Maybe anybody else would like to share their thoughts on what the questions Anita-ji have raised?
Yeah, I just from a perspective point of view, this is SSC 1.0, okay? And as a part of the technical group, as a part of the working committee, we did consult a lot of people from the social sector also. And we had people like Ved Arya, Matthew Cherian, Girish Sohaniji being a part of the actual groups. I see the stock market itself has evolved, has become more inclusive as its processes have matured, right? And any structure like this, with the inputs from the community, with the inputs from the stakeholder, will evolve. And I think if you look, even if you look at the notifications the SEBI has come out with, every area, including that areas of focus list, right, has says subject to amendments by the governing council, subject to whatever amendments by the board. So the idea is not to create something that is constricting and rigid, and the idea is to create a starting point and evolve from there. And I think really, I mean, these inputs that have come from the panelists, from some of the questions that have been asked, will be very valuable inputs in the future versions of the social stock exchange. And in fact, I've requested Siljo for a list of all the questions that have been asked, so we can include them in our deliberations. We can also include them in the FAQs that we'll come out with, which will serve as guides for people wanting to know more about the social stock exchange.
Can I make a point here?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
If we look at the 15 broad activities in the 7th schedule of the Companies Act 2013, and then we see that they have to be according to the Sustainable Development Goals and the priority areas that have been listed around. If you look at that, eradication of hunger, poverty, inequality, healthcare, sanitation, education, protection of national heritage, promote rural sports, slum area development. If all these NGOs would do, it's a normative question. What would the government do? Government is washing its hands off. So why do we pay the taxes? You may be noticing the change of all the municipal corporation. We've been looking around and we've been studying all this in law and governance, that you go to the municipal corporation website, there is this particular project that the district magistrate has taken, and in collaboration with the corporation. Now, if everything is corporate money, then what will the government do? Where are our taxes going? This huge taxation, most taxed individual in this country. Where are all the taxes going? So this is like washing its hands off on one side and bureaucratization of charity work. It's a forced marriage. There is no need. All the goodness that some of us have been talking about, that it's a very good initiative, but why the initiative? Why the initiative? Why are we forcing social work under SEBI? That's a basic question mark, and we need to be a little critical about understanding that why this forced marriage is being imposed on the social sector. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Amita ji again for questioning it hard. And Siljo, are there any more questions?
Few are there chat box, and I think Maheshwar has addressed a few, but I'll just like to take one or two. It's like
maybe you can take one, yeah.
Yeah. Usually NGOs share an utilization certificate for the funds received by corporates in case ZC, ZP. How do we do this, or is there any such thing? Like, is there anyone who would like to address this?
They'll have to wait to see what will happen.
Yeah.
Sure. And then can you please share some insights on utilization certificate for funds raised through corporates? Utilization.
Sorry, say again, Siljo?
Can you please share some insights on utilization certificate for funds raised through corporates?
Okay.
But each corporate will have their own format. No, I don't know. Each corporate is different. They have their own format. But with regarding to SSC,
sorry, Justin, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Regarding the SSC, there are, the documentation requirements are clearly mentioned in the technical group documents. These are the documents would be required. So at the time of registration, more detail will be given. So I think it's too early to say what kind of reporting is going to come. So things are evolving. It may take time.
Yeah, it will evolve, and there may be already CSR practices, practices involved with the CSR Foundation. Some of them have already have formats, maybe in time to come, as Hemantji was saying, it's just a beginning. It will evolve with learn. And maybe more standardization and more informed utilization certificates will also involve, so that people, the organizations don't have to fill different certificates for different entities. I think those kind of works I also see possibility will evolve in future. That's what could be the way. So Siljo, thanks for taking up this question round, and I think it's a moment to thank all the panelists for a very useful discussion today. The questions around, why this initiative have started, what have been the experiences, the world around, what is it's coming up like a very promising also picture from one side that there is a potential of having more flow of resources and more coordinated flow of resources also becoming available for non-profit sectors. But there is serious questions also in terms of the inclusion, especially the inclusion of the smaller organizations, the community movements, how all of them can be more involved with this thing. But as a chair is, it's just a starting point with some thinking. And should SEBI be regulating it? I think that's also a question come up. If it is, maybe how the regulatory body can have a more involvement from civil society and from some other actors as part of it, so that it become more democratic regulation, not just the controlled one, and also in terms of social auditing. So ICI's primary work has been more on the financial auditing standards, but how we look at the social audit standards, where there are some practices available in the civil society sector, how that cross-learning can happen. And again, for that also, what kind of a self-governing body which can evolve to look at the social auditing part. So there have been a lot of really good questions and some good discussions which have evolved from this webinar today. And this is not just a standalone webinar in itself. I think we are here to, as Sphere India, as a collective of all stakeholders working for humanitarian development and resilience in India, we are here to take stock of all these discussions and questions and navigate them through the future initiatives and through our future discussions, including our advocacy and collaborative activities with various stakeholders. So we take it up the further discussion to see that the initiatives like this, when they see it, when they move out, in time to come, they have a more improved work frameworks with the involvement of everybody, taking care of the key principles of the humanitarian participatory work, which we all committed to. So with this, I think I thanks once again to all the participants for being there to make this session interesting. My thanks to all our eminent panelists. My special thanks to Mr. Mihir Bhatt and Justin Jebakumar as part of Sphere India committee, which have been, from the very beginning, studying this initiative within Sphere India. Have been planning the thinking on it. My thanks to Dr. Garima Nadesh from IICA, with whom we are again working up some other partnership standards, which also addresses some of the questions which we raised today, that how better partnerships can be secured between the corporates and the NGOs and the government, inclusive of all kind of smaller NGOs. Special thanks to Mr. Hemant Gupta for being part of the Social Stock Exchange initiative and for his very useful thinking and helping us understand it. And also his commitment to take up our questions for the FAQs and further evolution of the mechanism. Thanks to Mr. Vikas Gambhir for his very useful thoughts and contribution, and especially Dr. Amita. It's really great listening to all of you. I think that the questioning which is required for such initiatives, as they move forward. Thanks a lot for the useful perspective which you have shared. And my thanks, Siljo, for coordinating this session and making it happen. Over to you, Siljo, for you have any last announcement or information to share before we close this session.
Nothing much. I'll just say one thing, that generally what the general public judges a movie by looking into the main characters who are involved in the movie. So similarly, for this panel discussion, I'll say when we released that flyer, the flyer had the faces of such eminent people in the sector, and we already got the ratings by seeing at the designations and the name and the faces of such people. So, and you guys have really justified that role, and we are really glad that you could all make it up for today. And as you already heard, we can definitely quote all the questions and queries brought out from this discussion, and prepare an FAQ revolving around so that the further revisions on the SSC can be made accordingly. Thank you so much once again to all the panelists and the participants who have been there throughout the session. And with this, I'd like to say goodbye to all. Have a safe weekend and happy Independence Day to all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sujay. Thank you, Siljo and Vikrant, and thank you, ma'am. We'll meet again.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone, for this opportunity. Looking forward. Bye now.
Thank you. Thank you.